Hi guys, and welcome back to the Totally Wicked podcast. You may have noticed that we've had a little hiatus. This past summer has been so busy, but we're now back. This episode is going to be a little bit different. It's a shorter bonus episode, and while this one is just me, Tim will be back with us in the next instalment, so don't worry. Vaping is having a little bit of a tough time at the moment, and it seems like there's a new news story every day, and each one is just worse than the last. The problem with these articles is that they're also intentionally misleading. While we know it can be incredibly frustrating, we wanted to address any concerns that you may have. So I sat down with our Technical Director, Liam Humberstone, and got his take on the recent vaping witch hunt. Hi Liam, thank you for joining us today. And I suppose the first question is, where does this all originate from?
Where does all what originate from? So we're talking really about the press onslaught that has been building over the whole of this summer. And I guess it started with people vaping THC products, illicit THC products largely in the USA, and getting ill. And that's genuinely happening. There are people that are genuinely getting ill. And at the last count I saw, there are 41 poor souls that have lost their lives through this. This is clearly a really bad thing. The difficulty is that this was very much a vaping witch hunt, and it was vaping is bad, vaping is terrible, vaping is killing people. But of course it wasn't. It's the illicit THC liquids that were the problem. And so essentially a black market in the USA. Fortunately, not affecting the UK, but the press just conflated vaping with this illegal drug use and made it into, well, surely this is vaping that's killing people, ignoring the fact that in the UK and Europe, people are not getting sick. We don't have thousands of people getting sick. We do have millions of vapers, the same as they do in the USA, but people who are vaping nicotine aren't getting sick. So that's where it originated from. The difficulty is it then appears in the press to become open season on vaping. That you can, seems to be okay. You can slate vaping. Vaping kills people. PHE thought it was safe, but there are people dying in the USA. And once that scene has been set, it seems to be that you can do this. You can say anything to anyone. You don't have to do any fact checking. You just sell a load of newspapers by saying vaping's really bad for everyone.
It's scary for me because when I see some of these stories, they seem to be written in such a misleading way. So do we think that it's obviously intentional, but why?
I think that, over the last week, particularly yesterday, I was starting to wonder why. So we've had a couple of cases where they've found very isolated cases of people being poorly that have been vaping. Probably a very loose association of their illness with vaping, but if you fail to understand it any other way, pick on vaping. And I thought that was just a follow-on to sell some newspapers because it's good scare stories. But today's one, where we're talking about heart concerns, these have been gone over endlessly with nicotine in general. Basically, nicotine tends to momentarily harden people's arteries and blood vessels, just as caffeine does. It's just one of those things that it does. And this then becomes, well, we've done a study, it's doing that, therefore everyone's at risk of heart disease. And we've seen in the last couple of days people saying, well, as much as one puff on a vape could kill. And clearly that's not true. There are 5 million people in the UK, over 5 million, who vape or have vaped, and it hasn't happened to any of them. And how about the rest of the world? So nicotine vaping, if doctors are sort of putting this up, it's been around for 10 years. The epidemiology evidence would suggest that they are entirely wrong. And just suggest is absolutely not the case that this appears to happen to people. Therefore, it is very unlikely to be an outcome.
So my next question was going to be, is there any truth behind these stories?
There's always a nugget of truth. There's always something. And we think perhaps of yesterday morning's news reports around a teenager in Nottinghamshire who, well, if you read the papers, if you look at Sky News, anything else, you think he was on life support now. This actually happened 2.5 years ago, getting on for 2.5 years ago. So the difficulty with that is there's the nugget of truth, but that doesn't make a particularly good news story. So we take the nugget of truth of something that may or may not have been vaping related. I would love to actually have the evidence to find out. But that nugget of truth just gets expanded into "stop vaping or you'll die," and that sells newspapers. That becomes a great headline, and incredibly frustrating for people who are actually committed to harm reduction through vaping, because vaping is definitely and without a doubt saving a lot of lives in the UK. A lot of people will not be condemned to an early death through smoking, and vaping has definitely and without a doubt, any doubt, led them in that direction. I mean, my estimate is probably about 4 million people in the UK. No one takes that as a complete estimate, but my contention is that there are very, 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 very few ex-smokers that ever took up vaping. And at that point, that means that the people who are ex-smokers and ex-vapers are probably people who gave up smoking with vaping. And that is the difficulty. Is the truth is vaping is saving lots of lives. That should make a great headline, but no one's interested in that.
They're not, and it's, again, one of the, I think, frustrations that not only ourselves, but also our customers seem to have, is that they seem to be so focused on these really singular cases of all the people who vape in the world, and yet they don't focus on how many people each day are dying from smoking-related illnesses.
And that's a tough thing, because the numbers sort of trip off my tongue just at the moment. Because the first one that interests me is that one of the great tragedies is in the USA, where we've had potentially 40 deaths from illegal drug use. And I'm not criminalising the people who are doing it. People smoke dope in this country. People take cannabis in the USA. It's legal in some states. The problem is actually people supplying it. But 40 people have died in 2000 in hospital. 500,000 people die of smoking-related illness in the USA every year. 500,000, that's a lot. That means it's probably something like there are as many dying every hour as from smoking-related as have died from the whole of the THC vaping problems. And then in the UK, I mean, the first figure, the headline, it's somewhere in the mid-80,000s of people that die every year in the UK of smoking-related diseases. But the bit that staggers me as a statistic is there are nearly 500,000 people admitted to hospital from smoking-related every single year in the UK. And it's getting on for 1 in 10 smokers is going to get hospitalised by smoking every year. Yet we're demonising vaping as being this potential tragedy. And the tragedy would have unrolled by now if that were the truth. We've got tighter and tighter regulation. We're becoming better and better as an industry at policing ourselves. MHRA gives us a lot of help with enforcement to make sure we're all doing the right thing. Yet we still get this treatment as if we're some sort of black market product.
Tinfoil hat time. Why do we think now, and where do we think? It seems like there's an agenda. I just can't quite figure out if there is, what the agenda may be. What do you think?
You have to think about whose interest it might be in. Who would need the number of vapors to reduce? Now, if, as I've contended earlier, I'm referring to conspiracy theories, I'll stick with this as a genuine figure, 4 million people have quit smoking through vaping. That is a massive, massive hit on tobacco revenues. In future, it may be a very, very big hit on cancer treatment. So there are a lot of people with vested interests who would not like to see vaping carry on with its relentless destruction of smoking as something that people do. So I can't say who is driving it, but the last few weeks, as a follow-up to things that have come from the USA to happen in Europe, and particularly to happen in the UK, when we know that the vape industry is expressing that it has been hurt by this. We're fortunate in TW that we're very resilient as a business. Not all businesses are as resilient. And these repeated kicks are doing damage. And they're doing damage to the sector as a whole. And that's a tragedy. Because particularly for independent vape stores, the difficulty is they can't necessarily maintain that same resilience, yet they are the people who've been the grassroots behind allowing people to move away from smoking. So do I think that it's coming from any particular industry? you'd have to say that there's must be a huge interest within the tobacco industry. There must be a huge interest within the pharmaceutical industry. There's no one to point the finger at. I certainly know that not all of the tobacco industry have some huge combined anti-vaping thing going on. I know that many of them are committed to harm reduction, maybe not to the point of actually stopping selling their products, which might be a really, really good start on that. But I know those commitments are there. But it's hard to think of where else this regular onslaught could be coming from, because something's driving it.
Okay, the big one. Do vapers need to be worried?
About what? The first one is, do vapers need to be worried about the products that they're using? No, absolutely not. And if you're in the slightest worried, make sure you go somewhere really reputable for what you're buying. We are really committed to product stewardship standards. I would be devastated if I thought that we had done anything that would harm anyone in our products. More than that, if that was the case with any of our products, and it won't be, we do toxicology to death here. We're that's a bad way of putting it, but we're very, very rigorous about toxicology and production standards and understanding our products. But if by this very slim chance that we had a product that I thought could do any harm to anyone, that product would be off the market within hours. We would just not allow it to happen. We're doing this for the greater good, therefore we will always commit to the greater good. So no, vapers don't need to be particularly worried about the health side of things. I wouldn't recommend going down to a market stall to get THC liquid. I gather that they might be available in some place in the UK. They seem like a really bad idea. But no, buy from a good source. But what vapers do need to be worried about is whether this sector is actually going to survive. Because the likelihood is that the USA is going to end up within the next 6 to 12 months in a position where the only products that are available are tobacco flavoured, potentially menthol flavoured. They will probably be closed systems. They will probably be sold in convenience stores next to tobacco. And vaping as we know it could disappear in the USA. I don't think it can happen in the UK, but we will absolutely lose a load of choice. So no, vapers don't need to be worried about their own health, but they do need to be worried about the health of the sector, because surely we've all got to commit to this doing what it relentlessly needs to end up doing, which is wiping out smoking in the UK. So the worry is it won't be able to achieve its full potential.
So that leads really nicely on to the last thing I was going to ask you, which is, what can vapers do to be a positive voice to cut through all of this negativity?
Well, the first one is, if someone says to you, but vaping's really bad for you, isn't it? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Read 4 paragraphs down in any of those newspaper articles, and you will find that Cancer Research UK, the Public Health England, Department of Health haven't really come out on this, but only because they can't, because there's a general election about to happen at the moment. But you will find ASH have been particularly good on this. But you will find that all of the credible voices are saying, no, what you're saying in that is not the case. Vaping is safer. Vaping is better. Vaping is a very viable alternative to smoking. But you have to read down a little way to get that out of the article. If you're a vapor, read down, understand the facts that are at the end, and then when someone says to you, oh yes, 1 puff on a vape could kill you instantly, you say, actually no, there's really good evidence that doesn't happen. And 3.6 million current vapors in the UK. If that was happening, if that was happening, someone would know about it. Show me the bodies. For God's sake.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us, Liam, and hopefully we don't have to talk about this again anytime soon.
No, let's talk about nice things next time, like how well everyone is doing with moving away from smoking.
Cheers, Liam. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was Liam's take on the recent vaping news, and even for me, it was eye-opening. This has been our bonus episode of the Totally Wicked Vape podcast. If you have any comments or suggestions, leave us a comment. If not, I'll speak to you again soon with Tim when the regular podcast schedule resumes.